The small nation of Georgia has been subject to Russian attacks that threaten its very existence. Some Americans, when they read this news, may wonder where Georgia is or why we should care about the conflict between Georgians and the Russian army. It's, after all, a small and remote and obscure place, but history is often made in remote, obscure places, and it's being made in Georgia today. Georgia itself, my friends, a long and remarkable history. It was a 4th century convert to Christianity, one of the first nations on earth to convert to Christianity. You go to Georgia, as I have on several times, you'll see churches that go back to the 4th and 5th century. And it's been a part of the grand sweep that compromises Western civilization, but because of their location, their history hasn't been easy. Through the centuries, it's seen invasions and attacks from Mongols, Russian, Turks, and Persians. And through it all, they maintained their language, their cultural identity, and their national pride. And as you know, they were part of the Soviet Union, the then Soviet Union, and were able to achieve their independence when the Soviet Union disintegrated. And they're facing terrible trials today, but they'll get through this too. And my friends, and I'll talk about this a little more in a minute, but they're at a strategic crossroads. There's a pipeline, an oil pipeline, Baku, Tbilisi, and Ceyhan, which brings oil from the Caspian to points west and traverses Georgia. That's the very pipeline that the Russians tried to bomb. And I don't have to tell you about the price of oil and disruption of oil supplies. In this country, it's that little country, a country's territorial integrity, independence, and sovereignty. NATO countries reaffirmed at their summit in April that terrible violence has occurred. Now, let me just remind you exactly what's taken place here. On Friday, Russian tanks and troops moved through the Roki Tunnel, across an internationally recognized border, and into the Georgian province of South Ossetia. 2 years ago, I traveled to South Ossetia, my friends, and we went through this barricade, and as soon as we got into this place, which the Russians are maintaining hundreds and now thousands of troops, there was this huge billboard, and it said, "Vladimir Putin, our president." Have no doubt about Russian ambitions in this area. The Russian government stated it was acting only to protect Ossetians. And yet on Saturday, its bombing campaign encompassed the whole of Georgia. Hundreds of innocent civilians have been wounded and killed, possibly thousands. Military bases, apartment buildings, and other infrastructures all came under Russian fire. And the Russian Black Sea Fleet began concentrating off of the Georgian coast. Yesterday, before the weekend ended, Russian troops drove the Georgians out of South Ossetia and stepped up their offensive in the region of Abkhazia. Abkhazia is another area that the Russians have controlled in violation of Georgian territorial integrity. And Georgia asked for a ceasefire, and Russia responded by bombing the Tbilisi airport. Yesterday, Russian troops advanced on one city after another. Gori, Sanaki, Poti, and other cities were attacked. In 2006, I visited Sanaki and reviewed the Georgian troops who had served with honor beside American soldiers in Iraq. 2,000 of them served beside American soldiers in Iraq. And we're proud of that. President Medvedev stated that he has halted the offensive, but reports indicate that Russian military forces have continued attacks in some areas, and the situation remains fluid and dangerous. Foreign Minister Lavrov announced that Russia seeks regime change in Georgia and that its democratically elected president, quote, better go. In the face of this threat, the leaders of Poland, Estonia, Lithuania, Ukraine, and Latvia, you know, there's a common thread there amongst them. They all suffered under Soviet domination. They've all announced that they'll travel to the region, and the French president is in Moscow in an attempt to help resolve the crisis. They understand that it's the responsibility of the leading nations of the world to ensure that history continues to reform and make progress toward respecting the values and security of all free people. This is the situation in Georgia as we meet here this morning. The impact of Russian actions goes beyond their threat to a democratic Georgia. Russia has used violence against Georgia to send a signal to any country that chooses to associate with the West and aspire to our shared political and economic values. My friends, we learned at great cost the price of allowing aggression against free nations to go unchecked. With our allies, we must stand in united purpose to persuade the Russian government to withdraw its troops from Georgia. There must be an independent international peacekeeping force in the separatist regions, and we should ensure that humanitarian aid can be airlifted to Georgia's capital and stand ready to help our Georgian partners put their country back together. And we must make clear to Russia's leaders that the benefit they enjoy from being part of the civilized world require their respect for the values, stability, and peace of that world. My friends, today the killing goes on and the aggression goes on. Yet, I know from speaking this morning to the President of Georgia, Misha Saakashvili, who I have known for many years, that he knows that the thoughts and the prayers and support of the American people are with that brave little nation as they struggle today for their freedom and independence. And he wanted me to say thank you to you, to give you his heartfelt thanks for the support of the American people for this tiny little democracy far away from the United States of America. And I told him that I know I speak for every American when I say to him, today we are all Georgians. So these events are a long way from here at home, but the energy crisis that we're in derives in part from the fact that we get much of our energy from that part of the world. The small nation of Georgia has an oil pipeline that delivers oil from the Caspian Sea to world markets. And yet another reminder that it's time we got serious about our energy crisis and stopped sending $700 billion a year overseas to countries that don't like us very much, and stop this massive transfer of wealth. To countries that don't like us very much, and some of that money ends up in the hands of terrorist organizations, as you know. And my friends, the message we want to send to Washington, D.C. is come back off your vacation, go back to Washington, fix our energy problems, and drill now. Drill offshore and drill now.